and around some of the bones and around some of your organs. So this is a really complex web of stuff. The fascia's purpose is to redistribute impact through the body. Because it connects everything together, it allows you to basically divvy up impact forces into various parts of the body. And it's also responsible for proprioception, which is your body's ability to be aware of itself. So there's a lot of neurons in the fascia, and when the fascia gets injured, typically mobile function is greatly hindered. Pretty similar to when a muscle gets injured, but the fascia is a very important piece of connective tissue that a lot of people don't think about. I don't think most people know that it exists. But that's why the foam rollers exist, because when we develop scar tissue in our fascia, when we tear our fascia up, we want to break up all the gunk that starts collecting in it and restore our functional mobility. What causes injuries? Accidents. We are not covering accidents. We can't. That's an act of God. Muscular imbalances, which will be covered mostly through the assessment. Muscular imbalances when one muscle group is overdeveloped, or it could even be tight. It doesn't have to be developed at all, but it's just tight, or one is too loose, and you have some compensations that your body takes. Your body tries to work around whatever's not working properly, and by doing that, it stresses pretty much everything else in your body, which eventually can lead to some injuries. Lack of mobility, flexibility, or range of motion. These three things are all different, by the way, I think. Maybe range of motion and mobility are the same. But flexibility is your muscles' physical ability to stretch. Your mobility has to do with your appendage's ability to move around its joint space. And the range of motion is, I guess, the space in which you are either mobile or flexible. But yeah, they are different things. You can be very mobile and not very flexible. You can be very flexible and not very mobile. You want to be both most of the time. I am not very mobile or flexible, and it causes issues. And overuse and repetitive stress is probably one of the biggest things in parkour, other than... No, that's the biggest thing in parkour. We just beat ourselves up, and we kind of love it, but we are not nice to our bodies, and parkour will destroy you if you don't do it properly. So honestly, I don't think the human body is meant to be thrown into concrete several times a day. Alright, so we're going to go through some common injuries, but first I'm going to go through some basic anatomy, which is going to be a little boring. Acromion clavicular joint, which is the AC, or otherwise called the AC joint. It is your shoulder right here. So the joint itself, or okay, I think the next slide is function of that. But basically, it's where your clavicle meets your acromion space, which is this tip of your shoulder here. Yeah, awesome. Okay. So the deltoid muscle, which is this fat shoulder muscle on your arm, abducts and adducts, moving your arm up into the AC joint. And in that diagram, you can see the supraspinatus, which is like over here. There's a spine on your shoulder blade. There's a small muscle that runs right over it. You can't really see it that clearly here, but it's responsible for also pulling your arm up. What ends up happening with the AC joint a lot of the times is a shoulder impingement, because the shoulder was not designed properly. Evolution failed us. But the shoulder has a little bit of a hook at the AC joint, and it's really easy for a tiny little bit of flesh basically to get stuck in there, and it's not pleasant. But if your supraspinatus is functioning properly, it should be able to retract everything it needs to make room for your arm to come up. Hopefully you're mobile enough. This is the real important stuff. The rotator cuff. Is all the muscles around your shoulder blade, which are pretty much responsible for everything your arm does, for the chest. Push. I don't really want to go into all of these muscles because it doesn't really matter. It might matter in the future, but it doesn't matter now. The point is, there are basically two types of motions that are important in parkour. Internal rotation of the scapula, which is the shoulder blade. External rotation, and then you have internal and external rotation of the humerus as well. Our muscle up is an internal rotation. The internal rotators of the shoulder, or of the rotator cuff, are extremely small muscles. That's the important note about that previous diagram, is that all of these muscles are really, really small. They cannot handle a lot of stress. What ends up happening, well, we found in parkour about 6 years ago, not 6, like 3 years ago, especially after Blaine's Power is Nothing Without Control video, where Chasseurs back then had no clue what a muscle up was until Blaine pretty much started showing everyone. And everyone was learning how to do it. So everyone pretty much did learn how to do it, but we learned how to do it wrong. We learned the technique before we had the strength to actually perform the movement. And back then, a lot of people developed rotator cuff tears, and it honestly, probably why my shoulders don't work properly. If you aren't strong enough to take this stress, and if your external rotators are too weak, then I think that's next. Point 2, yeah. If your external rotators are too weak, then it can't support all the internal rotation that we're doing. Internal rotation is very, very stressful to our shoulders. And the terrible thing is, if you get a rotator cuff tear, you're not going to feel it. Most people don't know when they tear the rotator cuff, but what ends up happening is you can't really move, and it starts screwing up other things. The body's connected. If you screw your shoulder up, you can screw your hip up, and that can screw your knee up. It can be really complex when we start assessing, because we can find a lot of things wrong, but we don't know what the root cause of anything is, because something else could have caused it.
Why is it you can't tell that you've done a rotator cuff tear?
There are just no nerves in the... there's not a lot of nerve endings in the muscles themselves. So when you tear something, it has to... There are nerves near the insertion points where the connective tissue is.
Mm-hmm.
But there are no nerves on the muscles itself. And in some muscles you can feel tear, but most of the time when you tear a muscle, you're not going to feel it until you start moving in a very particular way. And with the rotator cuff, it has to be precisely that way, just because of the complexity of that joint.
Is that true for ligaments and tendons too? Is it like
You can't feel it.
Yeah.
I think you can feel the inflammation, but I don't think you can feel the direct pain.
I can feel my elbows and
I don't honestly know, but I'm pretty sure there's some nerve endings there, but most of the time I think when ligaments get torn, when you start to feel it, it's already pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I had an ACL tear, I couldn't feel that.
Yeah.
You know, meniscus, yes, but the ACL tear, nothing.
And when I tore my MCL, I didn't really feel much of anything unless I moved this way. That was the only time I felt it, but it was screwing up everything else. Bilateral compensation is basically one side is stronger than the other, one side is more mobile than the other. So the body adapts. If my shoulders are imbalanced, which they are, one shoulder is more mobile than the other, even my run stride can get affected because your arms have to move in a very particular way. And if they can't do it equally, then your hips try to compensate. And then your hips compensate, and your legs will compensate by rotating in or out. Your ankle might compensate. So a problem with my shoulder can give me plantar fasciitis. Most of the time, almost everyone has a imbalanced shoulders, by the way. Mine's a little bit more severe. Something you should probably watch out for is Kong vaults, Kongs and dashes, because they're supposed to be equal. When I do a really heavy one, I rotate to the side. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed that before, but I'll always land like this out of a Kong. And it's because my shoulders are messed up. Yeah, that's pretty much it. A lot of times with compensations or muscular imbalances, it's a mobility issue more than a strength issue. Strength affects things, but everyone's always going to have one side that's stronger than the other. The biggest thing is always going to be mobility. And that's the reason why in Urban Fit, the warm-up is nothing but mobility drills. Because you can do your mobility drills whenever you want, really, as long as you're doing them. If I put them in the warm-up, it warms people up and it helps keep everything working the way it should and hopefully improving things. Lower body, the hip, extremely complicated. I think even more complicated than the rotator cuff. The important thing here, actually, yeah, okay. The important thing here is hip flexors are almost always tight in every human being. Hip flexors would be the iliopsoas. Here it's called the psoas major and the iliacus, I guess. But those are your hip flexors. They are responsible for bringing your legs up. You're seated at a desk all day. Your hip flexors will probably get shortened. And we live in a society where for the past few centuries, children into adulthood are made to sit at desks. So a lot of times people have really tight hip flexors and it starts to bother things pretty much everywhere else in the body. And you also notice, if you guys have ever watched us do Urban Fits, like I think only Phil and Alex, you've done it once, but or a few times. Whether we're doing upper or lower body, we always stretch the hip flexors out because they're tight. You don't have tight hip flexors, it's really impressive. I've met some people. Johnny, how are your hip flexors? Were you the one who's like?
100%. Anybody?
I met someone recently who just had no hip flexor tightness whatsoever. And it was really, really weird. Hamstrings are really tight though, it's weird.
But then again, I never sit down. I sit in a squat or stand up.
He lives in a cave. The knee's probably one of the most important things in parkour. My knee just cracked.
Yep.
So, the important thing here is you've got your quad muscles, which is 4 muscles. The thing that I want to actually pay the most attention to are the vastus lateralis, yeah, on the inside, the vastus medialis on the outside, because they are responsible for abduction and adduction of the leg and femoral rotation, so hip rotation, internal or external. This will make more sense later. But pay attention to those 2 muscles, and the hamstrings on the back. Which posterior chain is? No, I forgot the posterior chain. Okay. So there are muscles on the back. Let's ignore the ankle thing. Apparently I missed a slide. The hamstrings and the glutes are responsible for the hamstrings are responsible for flexing the knee. Most of the time in knee issues, with modern people, it's really, really weak hamstrings and overactive quads that cause the knees to start tracking funny. A lot of times, if you strengthen up the hamstrings, then you will correct most of your knee issues. I don't want to say that. You will correct some of your knee issues. The ankle is extremely complex. I did not put the wrist in here, but I did put the ankle. It's kind of dreadful to me because I didn't even study all of these muscles when I did my stuff. We didn't have to because it's that complex. Like podiatrists are the ones who study these things. And they don't even point out the muscles I wanted to point out. The only reason I'm showing the ankle is because of shin splints, really. That's the most common injury in parkour, period. It's the most common injury in parkour. But also, it's the one where something as simple as strengthening up your ankles is going to alleviate pretty much all of your problems. Shin splints should never happen. It's just, the only reason they do happen is because people are running improperly, people are landing improperly, or this muscle, the tibialis anterior, and there's another one that goes in front that I don't remember the name of. These two muscles need to be able to pull the foot up. And if they can't do that, then they're not strong enough to be able to take an impact on the ball of your foot as ideally as you would want. Okay, so a lot of times, and you'll notice this in pretty much everyone in this gym, some of these are going to have an internal rotation, a femoral internal rotation, or an external. Which means some of these are walking around like this, or occasionally you find some really strange people who walk around like that. Obviously, if your hips are internally or externally rotated, I did that backwards, you go into a landing, the line of power, the line of transfer from, I guess, the ground impact up is going to go either out and then back to your hips, or in and then back up to your hips. Whereas you want it pretty much, not necessarily straightforward, but it should be straight as far as your legs go. You can point out. But from my hips, down my leg, and down my femur, and what the hell this bone is, I forget.
Tibia?
Yeah, there you go. I just said it like 2 seconds ago. It's going to be in a pretty much a straight line. So when someone has, most of the time, the issue is most of the time when someone is internally or externally rotated at the hip, a lot of times it is a muscular imbalance, but a lot of times it can also be a skeletal issue because people are born bow-legged. Dave Dawkins is a very bow-legged individual. He does his back levers and his legs are like this. And it's really awkward. But when it's a case of the skeleton, all you can do is try to fix it. But if there are no skeletal issues, then there's no reason to, I mean, your toes don't need to point straight when you're standing, but there's no reason to be standing around like this, because it's going to cause problems. It's going to cause problems if you're walking. People will see this all the time in parkour landings. When I can't do it, but you land and your knees will cave in. We know Tim does it. Occasionally they'll flare out, but that's pretty rare. Most of the time it's in. If your knees are caving in when you're squatting or landing, or jumping. Sometimes people will do it when they jump. Chimp does that as well. It means that the vastus lateral.
Medialis.
Yeah. I knew I was wrong. The vastus medialis is too weak because it can't pull the knee out. For the same reason as the hip rotation, you don't want your knees caving in when you're trying to either generate power or take impact forces.
I noticed that in kids' classes a lot. Kids frequently have, I guess, weak vastus medialis, and they tend to land knock-kneed knees in.
I think that's probably just because their joints are really jelly. They haven't hardened yet. I don't see a reason why children should be having muscular imbalances so early, although it is a new day and age, and
I see it a lot. The kids. Right.
yeah, but kids don't know their bodies like we do, and a lot of adults don't know their bodies period. So.
Only parts.
Overpronation of the foot. I'm doing all of these together because they're all the same issue at the end of the day. A lot of people will. Did anyone read Born to Run?
Yeah.